She'd been warned, of course. What young girl brought to the Tudor court wasn't innocence, but a thick shield of caution, backed by the sharp-edged sword of ambition. No naive Rose, she was a carefully tended weapon, yes. And yet, despite her upbringing, as she stepped toward the altar, she remembered her mother's gentle face and the echo of her lullabies. Was that also a weapon? Could a lullaby turn to steel in the crucible of power? When the archbishop placed the crown upon her head, she felt only the weight of gold. But when he stepped back, she saw the flickering candlelight catch something in its depths. Something ancient and terrible stirred within her, as if the crown had woken. Fear pricked her. She was only a child. Then the throne beckoned, and so she walked forward, step by careful step, until she sank into its cushioned depths. Beneath her, the throne seemed to sigh. Its velvet lining was cool against her skin, but the chill traveled upward, freezing her blood. Her smile, when she turned to meet her people, felt brittle upon her lips. The throne held a chill that seeped into her bones, reminding her that she sat not only on the crown jewels, but the graves of queens past. She had known the risks, of course. And yet nothing had prepared her for the crown's touch, for the way it seemed to drink her light, leaving her hollow. That night, in the still life chamber, the heavy brocade curtains muffled the sounds of the city, but they could not stop the whispering. In her dreams, she heard the chimes of distant bells, and when she awoke, her pillow was damp with tears she did not remember crying. Panic tightened her throat. She was young, too young to be alone in the vastness of the palace. Where were her ladies? Hadn't they been summoned, or was that only a dream? The door opened then, and her ladies entered, bearing lavender and camphor to sweeten the room, but their faces were drawn, their eyes troubled. "My queen," one began, her voice tight, "we heard you crying out." I must have dreamed," she whispered back, but even as she said the words, she knew they were wrong. She had never dreamed of a crown turning black, of jewels cracking like eggshells, of red-lipped women smiling from the shadows. Dreams were the stuff of silk and moonlight. The crown brought nightmares spun of bone and dread. As the weeks passed, the whispers followed her, weaving through the tapestries, slithering under the doors. Men she'd never met before brushed against her, their eyes gleaming with the same dark hunger. Faces she'd never seen swam in the crowds at court, watching her every move. Did they know something she didn't? Were they waiting for something? Nightmares bled into waking hours. A whiff of almonds, the clink of glass, the soft rustle of silkage, sound a drumbeat on the anvil of her fear. Then there were the headaches, cold fire behind her eyes, as if the crown were clawing its way into her skull. Sometimes she would wake gasping, the sheets tangled about her like a shroud. And always, the unsettling feeling that she was not alone. Once, as she stood before the glass, her reflection did not return her gaze. Instead, the queen's face was twisted in a silent scream. She reached out to touch it, and the queen recoiled as if burned. Then the face was her own again. But what if it wasn't? What if the crown had taken root, growing tendrils of darkness into the places where hope should live, poisoning the light with its touch? Each day the dread grew heavier, pressing down on her like a second crown. The king was away on campaign, and the palace, vast and echoing, offered little comfort. Still, she had duties. She must appear strong, she told herself. She was the queen. Yet even that thought rang hollow in her ears. Who was she? A puppet gilded to perfection, dancing on a string held by unseen hands? How long before they pulled her down to join the others? She closed her eyes then, surrendering to the silken ropes that bound her to the throne, and wept. Not for herself, but for the ghost of the girl she once was. A girl who would have laughed at such fears, who would have danced instead of dreaming of shrouds. The crown had stolen her laughter. It would steal no more. The year is 1541. You are watching The Fall of the House of Tudor, Season 2, Episode 3, Part 1. Catherine Howard. Catherine Howard's reign began as a season of music and wine. The great halls of Whitehall bloomed with feasts that lasted deep into the candle hours. Courtiers danced beneath chandeliers, heavy with crystal, their laughter echoing down the same corridors where the scent of rosewater mingled with something far less pleasant. An odor no one could name, though some swore it was the faint sweetness of decay. She was young, vivacious, her beauty compared to spring sunlight after a long winter. But to Thomas Arkwright, the royal archivist who now served quietly in the background, she was already standing on the edge of a precipice. The first sign came in the second month of her queenship. Catherine confided to her closest lady-in-waiting that she had begun waking in the small hours. Certain she had heard bells ringing far away. No one else in the palace heard them, yet she insisted the sound was real soft at first, then growing until it pulsed through her skull. The court physician dismissed it as the result of fatigue, perhaps too much dancing. Thomas, however, remembered the ledger. The bells had tolled for Anne Boleyn as well, each note a step closer to the scaffold. One evening, Thomas lingered in the shadows of the chapel after vespers, the air heavy with incense. Catherine knelt at the altar, her white sleeves pooling on the stone floor. The flicker of candlelight played upon her face. But the expression there was not the serenity of prayer, it was fear, sharp and raw. Her eyes darted toward the far end of the chapel, where the light did not reach. Thomas followed her gaze but saw only darkness. Still the hairs rose on the back of his neck. When the young queen finally stood, her lips moved, forming words he could not hear. And as she passed him, he caught the faintest tremor in her hand. By the third month, whispers began to coil through the court. The queen had fainted during a masque. She had taken to her bed for days. Her appetite had vanished, where she emerged for public appearances, her smile fixed, her skin paler by the week. At night, Thomas walked the echoing corridors of the palace. The stones cold underfoot, and only once he swore he heard the bells himself, low, mournful, and not from any belfry in London. It was during this time that a letter arrived at Thomas's chamber, slipped beneath his door with no seal. The paper was old, its edges browned, the ink fading but legible. It bore no signature. It spoke of a curse of the consort laid in blood during the founding years of the Tudor throne. When a woman wronged beyond measure had sworn that every queen would know despair before 30 winters had passed. The letter ended with a chilling line. The crown is not given, it's taken, and it takes in return. Thomas burned the letter, but the words remained etched into his mind. He began to study the queen's movements. The way her laughter now carried a note too sharp, the way she turned her head slightly as if listening for something. He saw her in the gardens one gray morning, alone among the frost-trimmed roses, plucking a bloom and pressing its thorns into her palm, until blood welled between her fingers. She did not notice him watching. She did not even flinch. As winter deepened, the bells came more often. Catherine told her confessor that she sometimes woke to find the air thick with the scent of iron, though the fires burned clean and no servants had passed her chambers. Then, one bitter night, a storm rose over the Thames, and lightning flared against the palace walls. The guards swore they saw a figure in black upon the queen's balcony, though the doors were locked from within. In the morning, Catherine appeared at court with her gowns hem-damp, though it had not rained inside. Thomas knew then that the clock was ticking faster. You might be wondering what this has to do with the present day. Well, throughout history, many powerful women have been persecuted for merely existing in positions of power. This series is inspired by those women whose stories have been forgotten or ignored, whose contributions have been erased, and whose experiences deserve to be remembered. If you want to learn more about the women of the past, who have paved the way for the women of today, we've got an account where we share all kinds of fascinating historical tales you won't and learn anywhere else. So go check it out. The clock had nearly run out. When Catherine failed to appear for the midday meal, the king sent for her, his face thunderous. He burst into her chambers unannounced, ignoring the pleas of her ladies to wait while he tore back the curtains, smashing the heavy oak paneling below. But Catherine was not there. Gone, too, was the bed and all its hangings. Even the walls seemed empty, stripped bare as if she had never slept there. At a loss, the king turned to Thomas, who felt a chill despite the summer heat. "Find her," the king commanded, "and bring her to me, alive or dead." Hours crawled by. Each tick-tock of the palace clock, a hammer blow to his resolve. And just as despair threatened to overwhelm him, a guard appeared, leading Catherine back to the king's court. Her gown was torn, her hair disheveled, her face drawn. But the most alarming was the vacant look in her eyes, as if something had hollowed her out from within. The king rushed to her side, but before he could speak, she screamed, a long, wordless sound that cut through the court like a knife. Then, as quickly as it started, it stopped. She slumped against him, trembling, her eyes wide and glistening. After what felt like an eternity, the king straightened, his face ashen. "Bring the Queen Mother," he said, his voice hoarse. While the court bustled to summon the Queen Mother, Thomas stayed by Catherine's side. She looked up at him, her gaze flickering with recognition. "I thought," she whispered, pressing her forehead to his shoulder, "I thought I might have found a way to escape this cursed place. There's a boat, a ship waiting to take me from these shores. Do you see it, Master Arkwright?" She gestured with a shaky hand toward the window. "If we hurry, we can be gone before the tide comes in." We searched her eyes, seeing nothing but terror and a terrible sort of clarity. "Your Majesty," he said gently, "there is no boat." When the Queen Mother arrived, Catherine had collapsed onto the floor, babbling in a language of nonsense words. As the Queen Mother cradled her daughter's head, Thomas watched the color drain from her face, leaving behind the stark white of bone and silk. By the time the royal physician arrived, the Queen was barely clinging to life. And though he fought to save her, the darkness under her skin was deeper than any bruise. The bells, the shadows, the strange welts on her skin, the whispers of voices on the wind, they all made sense now. The curse of the Lady Rochford, a queen in name only, died as the sun rose over Whitehall. News of the Queen's death spread like a plague, infecting the court with fear. Accusations flew. Was it poison? Had she fallen victim to some dark sorcery? Or was it merely God's judgment for her sinful ways? The king, grief-stricken and guilt-ridden, blamed himself. Every hour he had spent with Catherine flashed before his eyes, the stolen glances, the laughter, the stolen moments. In his despair, he clung to the one person who had been by Catherine's side until the end, Thomas Arkwright. "You must have known," he said, his voice cracking. "You must have seen this coming. Tell me, was there nothing I could have done?" Thomas met his gaze, his own eyes filled with sorrow. "You could have listened to her," he said quietly, "when she spoke of voices and shadows, when she showed you the marks upon her skin. But the sickness within her was not of this world, nor could any earthly balm have cured it." The king shuddered, realizing the truth in Thomas's words. Catherine had tried to tell him, but he had not listened. He had not wanted to hear the truth. All he had seen was a young, beautiful queen, a reminder of the son he had lost. Now, consumed by guilt, he would do anything to undo the past, to hold Catherine in his arms one last time. But time, like the tide, moves only in one direction. And as the mourners filed past Catherine's bier, the king saw not a beloved wife, but a specter of his own making. Oh, my skin crawls just thinking about it. Hello, friends. Welcome to my channel, and thank you so much for joining me today. Now, before we get started, I need to warn you this story contains mature themes, which may be disturbing or offensive. Reader discretion is advised. Also, if you're new here and you like what you see, please consider subscribing. And if you enjoy my work, you can support me through the links in the description below. And now, without further ado, let's begin. The summer of 1542 arrived with an unnatural heat that clung to the skin like a fever. The air in London was heavy with the smell of the Thames brackish and sour and within the walls of Whitehall. The air felt heavier still, as though every breath carried the weight of an unspoken truth. Catherine Howard had not been seen in public for weeks. Rumors thickened. Some claimed she was ill with a wasting disease, others whispered of treachery and adultery. But Thomas Arkwright knew the truth was older, darker, and far less merciful. On the 12th night of her seclusion, he was summoned not by the king, nor by any court official, but by a note slipped beneath his chamber door. The handwriting was unmistakable, the Queen's. "Come at midnight." Alone, the corridors were empty when he made his way toward her apartments, the torches burning low, shadows breathing along the walls. The guards outside her chamber did not look at him, only stepped aside as if they had been waiting. Inside, the air was stifling. Catherine stood by the window, her back to him, the moonlight outlining the fragile curve of her shoulders. She wore no jewels, no crown, only a thin white shift that made her seem almost spectral. "They will say I was unfaithful," she said without turning. "They will say I was foolish, vain, reckless. But none of it matters. The crown does not care for truth, Master Arkwright. It feeds on youth, on beauty, on the beating heart, and it will take until there is nothing left. When she turned, Thomas saw her eyes, ringed with shadows, yet burning with a strange calm. She reached for his hand and placed something cold into his palm. It was a ring, its gold blackened, the gem at its center cracked like a dried seed. "This was Anne's," she whispered. "It came to me the night after my coronation. I did not ask for it. I could not give it back." A bell tolled, then loud, close, though there was no belfry near. Catherine's face tightened, but she did not flinch. "Do you hear it?" she asked. Thomas nodded, the sound vibrating in his bones. She stepped closer until he could see the faint red welt circling her throat, as though an invisible chain were drawing tight. In the days that followed, events unfolded with grim inevitability. Accusations surfaced, trials were whispered about behind closed doors. And the king, once enchanted by her laughter, spoke her name no more. On a gray morning in February, Catherine was led to the tower. She walked steadily, her gaze fixed ahead. The same calm upon her face that Thomas had seen that night. As she passed him in the courtyard, her lips moved in a silent farewell. The execution was swift, though the wind carried the echo of the bell long after the blade fell. Thomas stood among the crowd, the cracked ring in his pocket, and thought of the ledger, the curse, the chain that bound queen to queen. He knew it would not end here. Well, somewhere even now another young woman would be chosen. Her head bowed beneath the weight of gold that was no gold at all. Years later, when Thomas himself lay dying, the ring still hidden in a box beneath his floorboards, he swore he heard the bell again, soft at first, then louder, each toll counting down to a moment he would never see. And in that final breath he understood. The crown had no master. It was the master. And it would go on feeding forever. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this story, please let me know in the comments and check out the playlist for more historical tales. Until next time, remember, some stories are best left untold.